speaker will be Andrew Barrett. He is a former student at Westchester University. While there, he was president of the Student Environmentalism Group and was organizer of Students for Democratic Society and several other programs. Currently, he's a board member of a national nonprofit that advocates church-state separation and freedom of thought. His academic interests include the philosophy of mathematics and the intersection of identity and technology. Politically, he's a strong left-leaning anarchist with interest in struggles for the freedom of thought and behavior, ethical anti-capitalism, free software, and social and environmental ecology. So everyone, welcome Andrew.
Thank you, Nicholas, for the introduction. Can everybody hear me? Thank you also to the organizers of this, and especially the audience for the opportunity to speak. I want to apologize in advance. My speech is probably a little longer than 20 minutes, so we might not get the whole 5 or 10 minutes for Q&A, but I'll try and get through it as quickly as possible. Actually, I'm a little worried that I'm going to disappoint people. The topic that I was asked to speak about was hacktivism, like computer activism. And if anybody's expecting me to talk about the sort of action-packed, sexy, popular image of somebody typing furiously on a keyboard and using satellites to blow up their enemies or something, that's not really what it's about. In reality, the people who do things like stealing your credit card via email, they're just criminals exploiting bad security. Hackers are tinkerers. They take things and make them do something new. They find innovative solutions to interesting problems. They explore and they play. If any of you have explored the tunnels underneath campus here, or figured out how to make moss into living graffiti, then you've probably got a little bit of the hacker spirit. But as fun as it would be to talk about clever hacks, I'm supposed to be talking about hacktivism. So actually, when I found out that I was going to be talking about that today, I didn't know quite how to approach it. I could talk about WikiLeaks and Bradley Manning and Anonymous, or I could talk about technical aspects of computer security and how most of us are extremely vulnerable. I could talk about, I could give stories like sort of war stories of people defacing websites of governments or Westboro Baptist Church, but instead, I decided that what I should talk about at a radicalism forum was really the sort of, well, there's a particular movement that has emerged from technical communities. It's a political movement that uses technology and law to advance the cause of freedom of thought. It's a non-utopian movement, not interested in getting to some place where we've never been before because people are going to be different after the revolution. But it's a movement where technologists make the guarantee of freedom an inevitable effect of the proliferation of communications technology. In the interest of disclosure, none of these ideas are mine originally, and they've been taken mostly from sources like Richard Stallman and Evan Mobley, who had some original ideas, but mostly stole from other people like Lawrence Lessig and Karl Marx, who stole from other people because that's how ideas work. In order to understand and contextualize this movement, we have to understand a little bit about the history and economics of information production. So I hope you'll indulge me. Okay, the history of all previous societies is the history of class struggle. And the system of European industrialization did in fact seem to simplify the class system into a conflict between those two great powers, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So that's how we got to the current state of things. And out of that came a lot of developments, but among them certain developments in the propagation of knowledge. The book represents the first extremely successful experiment in relationship between industrial processes of production and the system of distribution of information. It's kind of an idealized symbol of bourgeois culture. It's industrially produced, it's widely available, it's imperishable, imperialistic, possessive of many of the characteristics of our current culture. The book isn't the problem. In the 19th century, when political theory first understood that specter of communism, the system of information production that was in place took for granted, as Marx and Engels said, that the confrontation between the new means of industrial production, ever seeking their own refinement, ever overthrowing the social arrangements of the past, would end education produced a worker upon whom new wants could be more easily formed and whose production could be trained more thoroughly. The crisis of recurring overproduction, which Marx thought was the essence of the problem confronting the bourgeoisie, was solved with workers who could consume what was produced and whose minds were made open to the creation of further wants. So that's part of it. But then came Edison and his recordings, which led to the possibility of the mass production of culture. Music, for the whole history of human beings, was an acutely perishable social process occurring in a place at a time, consumed where it was made. After Edison, music was a non-perishable commodity that could be moved long distances and alienated from its producers, no longer a social process, but a thing, not communication, but a transplantation. The exploitation of the new opportunity here was the imperative of the class of home. It further encouraged the idea of the worker as consumer, as the market for the substantial reabsorption of all that surplus that industrial capitalism created. So after Edison, everything was made in a new context. Even the physical aspect of goods was inherently related to the symbolic aspect. And it was in the symbolic aspect of cultural production and distribution, the ability of the new technology to replace communication with transplantation, that the wanting that absorbed production could occur. Still, it took the new owners of the symbolic goods a couple of generations to figure out what their business was. It wasn't like they first suspected the manufacture of music or movies. It was the manufacture of celebrity, the creation of artificially large people, alienated copies of real human beings with whom fantasy personal relationships could be had. These artificially prominent alienated persons could absorb the wanting that large number of workers who have been brought by education to want. And there was a money machine in the manipulation of those fantasy personal relationships. So now it's no longer really clear to us whether those giant human beings make music or movies or what. Think about it, there's Lindsay Lohan, an actress, is she a musician or a prostitute? I mean, all the roles actually merge because all the fantasies in the relationship are available once the person gets big enough. But that isn't the end of the story. Eventually, everything went digital. All that was solid melted into air. Betamax and CDs are obsolete. Information as air achieved the apotheosis of bourgeois hope. Property could be made literally out of nothing. Indeed, it's the very nothingness that completes its excellence as property. The fact of its insubstantiality is the key to the untold riches that it represents. So Marx was actually right. Bourgeois invention wars on itself, destroying the very fabric of what it makes. And that's true. That was a victory, not a revolution. That was the achievement of an unexpected utopia for owners. And that's where the freedom of information becomes really important. We, first in the West and soon globally, are entering a new phase of human civilization, in which for the first time in the history of human economies, a dominantly large sector of goods has zero marginal cost. This is totally new, but the normal method of economic analysis still works. The easiest thing that you can deduce from that nice little downward sloping demand curve is that in a perfectly competitive market, the price of goods asymptotically reaches towards marginal cost. So we come to a question of morality. If all knowledge and culture and art, all farming techniques and blueprints and software and other useful information can be costlessly produced for everyone at the same price as it was produced for the first person, then why is it moral to exclude anyone from anything? I know of no moral system of philosophy generated by the economies of the past that can generate a principle to legitimize denial in the presence of infinite profusion. We are there. Not there in ESSA everywhere at the moment, but there in POSSA everywhere. Computing devices and network connections are proliferating even within the desperate poverty of the global south. We're entering not into the internet, we're not entering cyberspace. It's not a thing or a place, but a social condition, an internet society, where everyone is at least potentially connected to everybody else. The simple political economy is the economy of the non-scarcity of the goods that matter: knowledge, culture, wisdom, art, utility. There's a great example of indigenous people in Oaxaca who have discovered that they need the internet, not really in order to participate in the market economy, but to resist its pathologies. The network that now sustains the highly developed human societies, highly developed should be in finger quotes, right? Also sustains less developed societies in their determinations to develop according to their own internal principles. Every human society since the beginning has wasted almost all the brains that it possessed. We all know the truth of that, and we know that there wasn't any way to prevent that injustice. Mr. Eben Mobley goes around and he asks how many of the Einsteins who ever existed were permitted to learn WCU, but of course most of the Einsteins worked in the fields and never got the chance. There are 7 billion people now, most of whom will never be able to go to school. Their brains are being starved. The network can be used to change it. That's the aim of the free software movement, to ensure that the evolving network would not be biased at the invisible technical level with the ownership of the software that made it. We're trying to free the switches that are used to route the information around from the monopolists that currently control it. So we're not really talking about giving people software for no cost. We're talking about eliminating ignorance, allowing everybody to have the knowledge and the culture that they wish to obtain, because the alternative is the persistence of an immoral condition. So Richard Stallman was the first person to perceive an overall plan for what to do about it. He, along with some others, identified a 3-part solution: build freedom into the technology that runs things, put that technology into everything, and then turn freedom on. Make it possible for every computer to operate solely in the interest of its user, using software which everybody has a right to copy and modify and change and understand. Then, everybody will be able to affect the performance of the network as it affects them. Sure, not everybody's going to be a hacker who takes it apart and rewrites it and puts it back the way that she would like it to be, but everybody will be able to benefit from everybody else's experience and improvements. Really, the free software movement is about making free software and then giving it away into the free digital commons. The term free actually is a little deceptive in English because it can be a statement about price or it could be a statement about politics. They're both relevant, but the important bit is the freedom. The digital commons is a really interesting issue. Unlike a natural resource commons, the free riding isn't a fatal problem. Most of the people who use free software never return any patches to the system or support any programmers, and it doesn't matter because we can afford to produce for everybody at such tiny expenses that we can internalize them over a much smaller portion of the community and everybody in it. But there's still a danger from appropriation. The public domain can be appropriated from in freedom disrespecting ways. So some very bright people invented the concept of copyleft. It's a little hack to copyright law having to do with the way that exclusive rights work. It says that you can appropriate freely, provided that you put everything that you take out of what you appropriate back into the commons. A license that lets you do anything you want as long as you use this license from all works made from anything you got under this license. Once you've taken that step, once you've decided to use the owner's exclusive right in order to give the commons a principle of self-protection, then you've achieved a commons which can't be monopolized. That's the experiment now being pursued in the global software industry, which presently lives in a world of open commons and free commons and proprietary closed software and mixtures of all the kinds permitted by all the legal terms available. After 20 years, our results are really good. Free software is embedded irremovably in the belly of all the developed societies in everything that they do. It's not exclusively embedded there, but even the monopolists, who are the deepest funded, most powerful technological entities in history, can no longer remove the commons from the network. They cannot outcompete it, and there's some significant question as to whether they can compete with it at all. And the commons has the advantage that we've been thinking about the endgame far longer than the monopoly has. We know how all this plays out. We've been thinking about it for 20 years. But back to economics, we have to draw a distinction between 2 classes of goods that have zero marginal cost. One class is collaboratively produced and functional, the archetype being computer software. Such goods are inherently superior when produced without ownership relations. That's the free software idea. It's an anarchist production model. If nobody owns and everybody shares, then the result is inherently better stuff, because the forces of production for that class of goods are inherently imbalanced if it's proprietary. If it's proprietary, the people who want to use something can't make it. Those who see problems can't repair them, and no one developer can foresee all the uses of a good. The relation of persons to the means of production is distorted by property relations with respect to that class of goods. Unless coerced by political power and legal rules, anarchist production inherently outcompetes proprietary production of that type. In the end, the stuff that works and has to work well if people are going to use it will be produced without property relations, because the proprietary producers will have failed to make adequate stuff at competitive prices. But that's only one class of goods. You can't say about anarchist music that it's better than proprietary music. It's not functional, so it can't be tested for betterness or worseness. No objective measures are available, and so no competition in the quality of production can therefore be fully engaged. So with respect to the class of zero marginal cost goods that is non-functional, anarchist distribution is inherently superior to proprietary distribution. If you remember the 6 degrees of separation principle, that 6 nodes is sufficient form a connection between two random people. You'll start to understand why this is. When the proprietary music has left the post-production studio and has gone through 6 hands, it's made it to the store. But if nobody is excluded from the right to distribute, then when it has passed through 6 hands, then everybody who wants it has it. The proprietary systems of the distribution of culture are profoundly inefficient and expropriative of the interests of both the creators and the users, and they're going to be destroyed. Not by a class-based revolution of a bunch of narrow-scheming Bolsheviks in a cellar someplace, but by that very property of the educated, semi-bourgeois working class that capitalism created at the end of the 19th century to save itself from the Paris Commune. That collection of people who just wants to gratify the wants for everybody else is what's going to drive us. 16-year-olds move the world's music, whether the owners like it or not. And that means ultimately that musicians can work it. Of course, before, most of them couldn't. The creation of those big people meant squashing a lot of small people. If you're going to keep 94% of the gross in the production of music, you're going to have only a few musicians. They claim that the reason that they have a legitimate control over more than 90% of the world's popular music among 5 companies is that they know which music is good. So the exclusion of the users who cannot afford the music is nothing compared to the exclusion of the poor musicians who can't create. The vast inequity isn't just the exclusion from culture, it's the exclusion of potential creators from creation. So the owners are facing a terrible problem. The bourgeois cannot exist without the constant revolutionizing of its constituent relation, and they're about to lose. When we fight the RIAA and the recording companies, they say, that's piracy. But that's not honest. They want us to believe that they're concerned that 5% or 10 or even 15% are going to stop paying and listen to music for free. But that's not the problem. That's not their fear. The fear is that 100% of the creators will abandon the old systems of distribution, and then they lose not a little or a lot of everything. Now, the real relations to the means of production are the creators, not the owners. So nobody makes, like soon anyway, nobody is going to be making $10 million a record, and no musician will have a day job. So far, we've learned that it's possible to produce tens of billions of dollars worth of capital equipment with no significant capital investments, because it's zero marginal cost. That equipment is now producing more than $100 billion in annual economic activity in the world economy. And it will produce even more, even though the world economy is about to shrink, because our portion of the world economy grows at the expense of that which has non-zero marginal cost when businesses don't have any more money. So for free software, the news is going to be good over the next few years. We're on the turf that we made, and we know how to defend it and grow it. And now it's the monopolists who don't know how to save their businesses. They're going to try different things, like encouraging you to switch from programs that you own to cloud-based services that they provide for you. But that's not going to work. They're going to fail. Google gives you free phone calls and email, provided that you let them analyze and report everything that you say so that it can be data mined by them along with everything else they know about you, which includes everything else that you type into the search box, which is pretty much everything that you think about and care about, are planning on, are afraid of, are concerned with, as well as what you buy, why you buy it, what you tell the focus groups, and who your friends are. Facebook offers a similar service at a similar price. These services have no monetary cost, but they're certainly not free in the important sense. Whether or not what they're doing is moral depends on whether the data miner can figure out any reason why it doesn't want every Einstein to learn physics. And that's a really tricky question, because the data miner wants to have good relations with governments, and the data miner wants to be in charge of the advertising business. But advertising-supported models on the web are ultimately doomed, because in digital media, when you give people knowledge, you can't force them to take advertising. Digital media are filtered. That's the beauty of them. Lots of you probably use the Firefox browser. It's a free software browser that can easily install something called AdBlock Plus, which pretty much eliminates all ads. A.J. Liebling said that the freedom of the press belongs to him who owns one. We no longer need to fight to maintain the freedom of a few privileged folks in the public information business. We maintained it quote to mute because we didn't know how else the Einsteins were going to learn physics, and now we do. The inevitable inference is when everybody owns the press, then freedom of the press belongs to everybody. And that's where we're moving. And when the publishers get used to that, they'll become us and we'll become them. Textbook publishers are deeply afraid because soon we're going to see cheap book scanners connected to OCR that will scan a 1,000-page book in less than an hour. And when those cheap devices are sitting in every dorm, and everybody's sharing textbooks, then the publishers, who are a very tightly oligopolized bunch of knowledge merchants, are going to have a scheduled heart attack. And now they know that it's going to happen in a society where people are afraid that their children aren't going to have money for college. And when publishers say that we have to rise in their defense for charging kids $1,000 a year to buy college textbooks with it, there's not going to be a lot of political support for it, which means not only are they about to face a significant technological challenge to the oligopoly, but they're about to face it under terribly adverse political and economic circumstances in this country. Our comrades in India, who have never been allowed to go to school, don't have very many things to say about the textbook publishers either. Which is why what we can expect is universal access to all materials used in public education everywhere. There's no point in reducing the demand below that. It'll be technically within our reach very soon. When free software folks made these plans, they saw that the very point about the digital commons is that it's friendly to software businesses. It gave them an opportunity to pool research and development activities. They know how copyright and patent competition hurts them and costs them significant deadweight losses. It requires them to reinvent and relearn and retrain and catch up. So what's happening now is essentially that we've completed phase one of the most important plan that we knew how to make, to bring about a world in which all the Einsteins learn physics. Now, we have the opportunity for a political insistence on the importance of the commons. We must explain to people about the consequences of too much ownership, too much exclusivity. And we know how things could be different, which doesn't depend on utopia, but on a thing that already runs on a USB thumb drive. Please, think about joining the commons for your school books, for what's in your laptop, for your smartphone. Think about all the ways that you can benefit by connecting your life to the things that we share. I trust that you'll decide wisely. As you attach to yourself to the commons, you'll recognize that you don't need TV because you have YouTube. You don't need a newspaper because you have RSS feeds. And you don't have to buy textbooks because there's a copy in the library and you have the right to rip it. And tell people about this. Remember that in the digital commons grows healthier with more people. And people need to know what it is that really causes prosperity. In the next few years, what causes prosperity in the United States is going to be rare enough to notice. We can now use the network that we built in commons to become the device which shows why the commons is essential. We can explain to our friends the dangers of the restrictive 4G cell phone networks made by people who don't let you bring your own software in. That you don't have to have a phone that spies on you. You don't have to see every advertisement. Your relationship to the commons is itself a political act with public consequences that should be publicly shared. 20 years ago, the great socialist experiment finally failed. Nothing left but capitalism and free trade, right? But now we're living through the moment where that myth begins to fall apart. We've been doing this a long time, 1,000 years. What did we want? We wanted freedom of thought and of personal development. We wanted not to be held in serfdom, tied to the land, or told by corrupt patriarchs that we couldn't be saved unless we agreed. We struggled for 1,000 years simply to be allowed to become. It was an impossible task. Tens of thousands of people died. Lots of people starved. And lots of people never had the chance. All the way along, there were opportunities, and we tried to take them. And often they led us to violence because we didn't know how to avoid it, because we had to redistribute stuff with non-zero marginal costs, because we had to take one thing away from a rich man and give it to a poor man. And the rich man resented it, and he fought back, and you can't win that fight. Because even when you triumph, the very thing that you're trying to make gets killed in the struggle. And even so, when we won, we still lost. So they wrote great stories about it from both sides. Some excoriated us from the violence, and some wanted to make us noble for the ambition. And people learned that it was a great romantic episode that never went anywhere. And it's different now. Things have changed. Something is happening which has never happened before, and it changes the outcome of the game. Methods of gaining what we want have changed. What we want is now actually possible. The great riddle of socialist politics, the great difficulty that has presented itself, every struggle for human equality since the beginning has been lifted in substantial part. Because we now live in a world where we can make enough for everybody. We're now capable of achieving that relationship that we needed to achieve, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. We are ready now. That doesn't mean that there isn't any work to do. There's plenty of work for programmers, for producers of culture, for lawyers. But as Evan Moglen says, there is good news about it. They've been doing it for a very long time. And it has wearied many a loyal person, and it has worn out many a strong person. The difference
entirely up to questions from the audience. So come with all of your inquisitiveness and fun-loving spirits. Thank you very much. I'll be back.